For the Queen, horses were not just a passion, they were a lifeline. Her bond with them ran deeper than any royal duty, woven into the very rhythm of her existence. But no one knew that her most prized equestrian treasures would spark a royal feud after her death. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. In private moments, long before the burden of the crown wore heavy, Elizabeth found comfort in the quiet breath of her ponies, in the steady rhythm of hoofbeats across the countryside. From the moment she was gifted her first Shetland pony, Peggy, at the age of 4, horses were more than companions, they were witnesses to her most unguarded self. Through war, coronation, and decades of political storms, she returned to them, not for power or status, but for peace. What few knew was the extent to which this devotion became a legacy in itself. In her later years, the Queen kept detailed journals not of her state visits or policy meetings, but of her horses. Breeding cycles, temperaments, bloodlines, victories, losses, names only she remembered. These weren't the ceremonial royal studs. These were personal, chosen, bred, and cherished. And among all the royals, there was one person she trusted with that world, Zara Tindall. The daughter of Princess Anne had grown up not just near horses, but within the same rhythm the Queen had once known. Unlike the rest of the firm, Zara never chased rank or press. Her hands were calloused from reins, her victories earned in arenas, not royal spotlights. The Queen admired that, trusted it. Over time, Zara became more than family. She became steward to the Queen's unspoken kingdom. And then, following the Queen's death, the storm broke. Locked in a private vault was a letter addressed not to Charles, not to Anne, not to the nation, but to Zara. A personal directive, handwritten, instructing that the Queen's personal horse collection be entrusted to her granddaughter, not the incoming king. It was a decision that bypassed centuries of royal inheritance expectations, and it was about to ignite one of the most emotionally charged family disputes in years. But that letter wouldn't stay private for long, and when its contents leaked, the palace doors shook. It was handwritten, signed with the Queen's own initials, and sealed away in her personal safe. When opened, it revealed a truth that blindsided Charles the monarch had chosen Zara, not him, to inherit the royal studs. The letter had no royal seal, no official stationery, just the unmistakable hand of a monarch who knew exactly what she wanted and who she trusted. Dated several months before her death and marked only with the words, "To be opened after." It bypassed tradition and protocol in the most personal way imaginable. In it, Queen Elizabeth made clear her desire for Zara Tindall to assume stewardship over her cherished horse collection, not as a matter of title or obligation, but of soul. She spoke of Zara's unwavering instinct, integrity, and devotion, qualities the Queen believed necessary to preserve not just the bloodlines, but the spirit of the horses she had bred, raised, and loved. For Charles, the shock wasn't merely in the decision, it was in the subtext. This wasn't about horses. It was about legacy, and in this instance, his mother had chosen someone else to carry forward her emotional crown. Witnesses say Charles was visibly shaken. In a closed meeting with aides, his first reaction was confusion, then disbelief, and then silence. The king, who had spent decades waiting to inherit every symbol of monarchy, had been passed over on something deeply symbolic, not by the system, but by his mother's pen. Senior aides debated what the Queen's intent had been. Was it a heartfelt bequest, a practical matter, or a final quiet judgment on who truly understood her? Some urged immediate damage control. Others hoped the document could be interpreted differently. But one fact stood firm. The language was clear. There were no loopholes. The horses bred not for ceremony, but companionship were to go to Zara. Charles initially suggested a private compromise, perhaps a joint custodianship or a delayed transition. But that idea fell flat before it even began. Because beneath the politics and heritage, the message was painfully simple. Zara had earned something Charles believed should have always been his by right. But compromise never came because Charles saw something in that letter he could not accept. The new king had waited a lifetime to take the reins, but never imagined being outmaneuvered by his niece. Sources say his rage was not just about horses. It was about legacy, control, and being denied by his mother one final time. The horses were a symbol, not just of heritage, but of connection, an unspoken language between the Queen and her most trusted confidant. And in the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace, where diplomacy wears a crown and every whisper echoes centuries of tradition, Charles was blindsided. Furious, he summoned his private secretaries to an emergency meeting. The agenda wasn't policy or ceremony, it was Zara. Questions were raised, thinly veiled accusations made. Was she manipulating sentiment? Did she influence the Queen's decision in her final months? The tone turned sharp, raw, and deeply personal. What began as a disagreement over horses quickly exposed something far deeper, a fracture in the very core of the royal family's future. Behind the thick curtains of formality, a power struggle was unfolding. According to palace sources, Charles allegedly described Zara's actions as unbecoming, suggesting she had overstepped her place. The words, once spoken, could not be taken back. Camilla, ever the strategist, urged restraint. She advised Charles to let it go, suggesting the optics of fighting over the Queen's final wish would only backfire. But Charles refused. He couldn't let the gesture stand not without contest. In a move that startled even his closest advisors, he authorized a quiet legal review of the letter's authority. Could an informal document, despite its emotional weight, supersede royal inheritance structures? Could Zara's role be minimized under technical grounds? The effort wasn't about legality, it was about reclaiming control. But the palace was unprepared for what happened next. Princess Anne, typically reserved and neutral in internal disputes, made her stance unmistakably clear. She sided with Zara, openly, without hesitation. And in doing so, she drove a wedge that no protocol could smooth over. For Charles, it was not just a setback, it was a revelation that even among his siblings, allegiance wasn't guaranteed. And while the men clashed behind closed doors, Zara remained silent until the royal studs summoned her name. Under the cover of dawn, Zara entered Sandringham's private stables alone. There were no cameras, no courtiers, only the memory of her grandmother and the legacy she was being asked to protect. The air was still, heavy with unspoken emotion, and for a moment, time seemed to halt. The visit hadn't been announced, nor planned. It came in the form of a quiet message, discreetly delivered by the royal equerry, asking her to come alone. Zara didn't hesitate. She knew what was waiting for her wasn't just ceremonial. It was spiritual. Each step into the familiar stable brought back waves of memories, mornings spent beside the Queen, days where laughter over saddlework replaced palace tension. But this time, something had shifted. The space felt sacred now, wrapped in finality. And there, in a worn, leather-bound stable book, tucked between pages, tracking lineage and training logs, she found it. Another letter. Small, folded precisely, handwritten, and unmistakably signed Elizabeth R. The note was simple, yet profound. You knew them as I did. Let them run free. It wasn't an order. It was an anointing. A final trust, passed not with fanfare, but with faith. The Queen had known. She had anticipated resistance, had understood the whispers that would come. But she had chosen Zara not just as a granddaughter, but as a guardian of what she held most dear. And in that stillness, Zara understood her role wasn't about possession, it was about protection. Stable staff, some of whom had served the Queen for decades, were present. They watched in silence as Zara moved among the horses, not as a royal, but as one of them. And it was her calm, her familiarity that moved them. There were no speeches, no declarations, only action. She walked the grounds, checked the mares, whispered the Queen's name as if it were still present in the hay-scented air. The staff later said they felt something shift that morning. Not power, but peace. Back at the palace, word of Zara's visit spread quickly. When Camilla heard, she didn't raise her voice. She simply turned to Charles and said, "She's already accepted." It wasn't a threat. It was a reality. The Queen's horses had made their choice, and so had Zara. But acceptance would soon clash with royal resistance, and Zara was about to be tested. The fault lines were no longer invisible. Behind palace smiles, whispers grew louder. Princess Anne took her daughter's side. Prince William remained silent, and the monarchy's core began to fracture from within. Before long, the tension wasn't just a private family matter, it was a simmering crisis no one could contain. Anne, never one to back down, called Charles' reaction petty in a closed-door meeting, accusing him of turning grief into a power struggle. Her defense of Zara was fierce and deeply personal, rooted not just in maternal instinct but in her own sense of royal duty and fairness. William, caught in the middle, found himself paralyzed. He respected Zara's place, admired her integrity, but his loyalty to his father pulled him in the opposite direction. Catherine, watching the pressure mount, urged him to step in, warning that if the palace didn't resolve it quietly, the headlines would do it for them. Behind the scenes, the rift grew. Eugenie and Beatrice, long considered marginal to the crown's inner circle, reportedly made their positions clear. They stood with Zara. And suddenly, this wasn't just about horses, it was about who the Queen had trusted and whether her final wishes would be honoured or erased. Among senior advisors, debates turned heated. Some insisted the Queen's letter amounted to an emotional will, an informal but morally binding directive that should be respected. Others feared the precedent it would set. If sentiment overrode succession, where would the line be drawn? Tensions leaked into official briefings, courtiers hesitated. Every glance in the corridors of Buckingham carried subtext. Even the staff noticed shifts, meetings shortened, conversations clipped, the warmth of grief now replaced with strategic distance. The Crown was not only grappling with public perception, it was internally at war. Charles, isolated by his own insistence, began losing allies. What began as a quiet disagreement over a beloved tradition had become symbolic of something deeper, the future of the monarchy's soul. Then came the day no one expected when Charles issued an ultimatum that would change everything. Return the collection or relinquish your royal privileges. That was the choice Charles offered. But Zara's reply wasn't meek, and it wasn't political. It was personal. The ultimatum arrived in the form of a formal palace memorandum, requesting Zara defer inheritance of the royal studs until further review. But everyone knew what it really meant. Charles wanted control, and he wanted it now. For Zara, this wasn't just about mares and ledgers, it was about memory, about a promise, about the bond she shared with the Queen that spanned far beyond blood. The Queen had entrusted her with something sacred, and no crown, however heavy, would undo that. Anne, hearing of the demand, wasted no time. In private, she confronted her brother, reminding him that this was not merely about legacy management, but about their mother's final acts of clarity. According to a senior aide, Anne told Charles, "You are not correcting her wishes, you are erasing them." The tension now outgrew the family's private chambers. When word of Charles's ultimatum leaked, the media seized on it with brutal efficiency. King versus niece made headlines from London to Sydney. Public opinion erupted. For many, it wasn't just another royal dispute. It was the haunting question of whether Elizabeth's voice could still be heard through the fog of power struggles and generational pride. Zara, long silent through the storm, finally issued a rare public statement. Short, composed, but razor-sharp. "I serve the Queen's memory, not the throne." The words cut through every headline and every whisper behind palace walls. Equestrian boards across the Commonwealth quickly weighed in, reaffirming their trust in Zara's stewardship of the late Queen's breeding lines. The racing world rallied around her trainers, breeders, and even former jockeys began sharing stories of how the Queen had always believed Zara understood horses not as property, but as purpose. Zara wasn't just holding reins, she was holding reverence. As Charles faced mounting backlash and fractured family unity, a strange silence fell over the palace. But that silence wouldn't last. And just when it seemed the crown would strike back, the Queen's voice returned in an unexpected form. In a never-before-seen recording left for the royal archives, the Queen spoke plainly of legacy, of Zara, and of the choice she made that would now haunt her son. The video was recorded quietly, tucked away by the Queen in her final year, intended only for private documentation. But its release, leaked by someone deep within the royal circle, sent shockwaves through the monarchy. Sitting with unmistakable composure, Elizabeth II spoke directly to the camera, reflecting on the legacy she hoped to preserve, the future of her beloved horses, and the granddaughter she had come to see not just as family, but as a kindred spirit in duty. She praised Zara's loyalty, her courage, her gentle strength in a world too often built on thunder, and made clear that her decision to entrust the royal studs was deliberate, rooted not in rebellion, but in love. The Queen's tone was soft, but the message was thunderous. I have watched her ride through storms, literal and otherwise, and return stronger. She knows the horses. She knows what they mean. Let them remain where they are understood. Then, in what would become the most debated moment of the entire video, she mentioned Charles by name. My son has other duties to carry. The crown is heavy. Let him carry it. Let her carry this. For many, it was a gentle endorsement. For Charles, it felt like abandonment dressed as grace. When the video was leaked, palace officials scrambled to contain it, but it was too late. Public sentiment, already teetering, shifted hard. Commentators began openly criticizing Charles's resistance. Social media lit up with praise for Zara's quiet dignity and for the Queen's foresight. Newspapers, once loyal to the throne, questioned the king's ability to separate personal pride from the larger weight of the crown. Charles, already wounded by the Queen's private letter, now faced her voice immortalized and undeniable. This wasn't just another headline, it was the Queen's will, not as legal doctrine, but as emotional truth, one that echoed louder than any decree, and it left no room for doubt about her wishes. The public may have chosen sides, but Charles wasn't done. He had one final move left. After weeks of silence, Buckingham released a carefully worded statement. Charles would honor the Queen's wishes, but insiders say this was no graceful exit. It was surrender. The official announcement came not in the form of a televised address, but through a polished press release, deliberately timed and cautiously phrased. It declared that Zara Tindall would oversee the stewardship of the Queen's personal horse collection, a phrase that danced around ownership, authority, and intent. Not once did the palace use the word inherit. Not once did they say the words passed down. But the message was clear enough. The Queen's wishes had been followed, but only after weeks of internal resistance, bitter negotiation, and quiet, escalating backlash. Charles had lost. And he knew it. Behind the scenes, aides pushed for a framing that preserved royal pride. It was spun as a collaborative arrangement. Zara, they said, would partner with the crown in maintaining Her Majesty's equestrian vision. She had claimed it. The gates of Sandringham's royal stables were open to her. Without restriction, without oversight. The Queen's personal journals, long off-limits even to Charles himself, were entrusted to Zara's care. Her access was total. Her position, though unspoken, was absolute. The optics were carefully engineered, but perception has a will of its own. Public support for Zara soared. Once seen as a quiet royal on the periphery, she was now hailed as a symbol of devotion, the granddaughter who put heritage above hierarchy. Commentators praised her humility, her composure, and her fierce loyalty to the Queen's private legacy. What started as a familial feud had blossomed into a national reckoning about what the monarchy should preserve and who it should empower. Charles, meanwhile, appeared shaken. Though he signed the approval, insiders reported he did so reluctantly, still harboring resentment over the Queen's final video message and Zara's rising public stature. Camilla, ever the strategist, urged him to pivot, to turn the page, but the shadow of this decision would linger longer than expected. For the first time, the crown had been publicly challenged on something deeply personal and lost. And yet, Zara never gloated. Her response to the announcement was as measured as it was meaningful. She thanked the king, she praised the queen, and she promised to honor the bond between a woman and the creatures she loved more purely than power. It was a victory not born of ambition, but of principle. But behind Zara's composed smile was the knowledge that the battle she won had revealed something deeper about family, legacy, and silent loyalty. In the end, it wasn't about horses, it was about trust, about who the queen saw when the crowns were removed and the titles faded. In choosing Zara, she chose something the monarchy had long forgotten: instinct over image. The dust had finally settled, but what lingered was something more profound than the clash between king and granddaughter. It was the question of legacy: who truly understands what it means to carry on a monarch's soul, not just her name. Zara, in the quiet aftermath, didn't seek to parade her victory. She turned to purpose. She launched a new initiative in the Queen's name, using select horses from the late monarch's collection for therapeutic programs, children's outreach, and public riding events for wounded veterans. The move stunned even her critics. It wasn't symbolic. It was sacred. While Buckingham remained tight-lipped, the world took notice. The horses once kept behind royal gates now trotted through community fields, soothing trauma, inspiring joy. Equestrian organizations applauded the decision. Support poured in, not for the crown but for Zara, and slowly the public realized what had happened. The Queen hadn't chosen Zara to spite Charles or disrupt tradition. She had chosen the only one who would turn inheritance into impact. The monarchy, so often obsessed with image, had been reminded that true power isn't declared. It's demonstrated. Behind the palace walls, not all wounds healed. Charles, still carrying the weight of being overlooked, maintained a cold civility. Their relationship, once warm, now rested on a strained tolerance. Anne, ever the anchor, remained quietly proud. She didn't boast. She didn't interfere, but to those who saw her watching her daughter take the reins literally and metaphorically, it was clear she knew this had been the right ending to a complicated story. Even William, who had stayed on the sidelines, privately expressed admiration for Zara's strength, and Catherine, who had long admired the Queen's quiet conviction, told a close friend, "It's not the title that made Zara royal, it's what she chose to carry." The Queen, remembered so often for her crown, was now also remembered as a grandmother, one who saw beyond ceremony, beyond protocol, one who left a final gift not just to her horses, but to the family itself. A challenge, a reminder that true royalty is measured not by obedience, but by quiet courage. And as the royal stables grow quiet once more, one truth remains: some inherit titles, but others inherit trust. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.